Story 1. I was supposed to send a rejection letter to someone I knew after a failed job interview, but I waited a few days so he could have a good weekend. Story 2. I was at Walmart in 2009, in the break room on my lunch break, talking on my cell phone. Story 3. I was 91 days away from qualifying for a pension through my employer and was fired with 90 days severance so they would not have to pay. Story 4. I request that my desk be moved because the person who sat behind me shot me with a pellet gun. Story 5. I got fired once for having emergency gallbladder surgery. We had a telephone deposition with Human Resources and the unemployment judge. After they explained when I was fired, the judge asked them why they had not offered me leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act. They said, "He did not ask." The judge said, "It is your job to offer him leave under the Family and Medical Leave Act. You are lucky he did not sue you. The unemployment benefits were approved." Story 6. A coworker saw me injecting insulin into my stomach and fired me for injecting drugs while at work. Story 7. I took a coffee mug home from the office kitchen on a Friday. On Saturday, Human Resources called me into an emergency meeting and fired me on the spot after security reported seeing me leave with company property. I later proved the mug was mine and was offered my job back, but I declined to return. Story 8. I was fired for reporting the daycare where I worked to the state for blatant violations and for providing photographic evidence. The facility was shut down shortly afterward. Story 9. I was working in electronics at Walmart. There was a rule that you could not check out family members, and the unspoken rule was that if you knew someone well enough to know their first name, you were not allowed to check them out on your line. I was working the day after Black Friday with a line extending out the back of the department. I was the only cashier in electronics. A friend of my mother's was in my line. I had already started scanning items when I looked up and realized I knew her. She did not have any electronics, so I went ahead and checked her out. A coworker reported to management that I had checked my mother out on my line. They were both overweight, the same age, with similar haircuts and glasses. I understood the mistake since I had not been working there long. When I explained to management who it actually was, they said I should have stopped, called a manager to cancel the transaction, and walked her to the front of the store to be checked out by someone else. Because I checked someone I knew in passing rather than waiting for a manager during the Saturday rush and holding up my line for 10 to 15 minutes, I was fired on the spot. Story 10. I was not available to work during my approved vacation. Story 11. While working in the produce section of a grocery store in Iowa, someone heard me say I was stocking cherries, which they interpreted as stalking cherries, meaning virgins. The next thing I knew, the produce manager and I were outside and he offered me a ride home because my parents were working. I walked home, and someone randomly threw a McDonald's cheeseburger at me, hitting the back of my leg. Weird day. Story 12. I got fired for quitting once. I worked in a shop that modified laptops. People wanted the latest Asus laptops with special thermal paste, a faster processor, or other custom changes, so we would swap parts and do whatever the customer asked, then put everything back together. It was an okay gig for me. It was not in my wheelhouse, but it was different from the terrible jobs I had taken before, so I stuck with it as long as I could. Until one day, a particularly tricky modification was required on one laptop, tricky enough that 3 different people, including me, ended up working on it. Typically, if a mod required that only the owner felt comfortable doing it, that person handled the whole computer, so 3 people working on one laptop was odd. In the kerfuffle of passing it around the office, the Intel Core i9 processor went missing. Instantly, the blame fell entirely on me. I searched my workstation and tore everything apart. The chip was not there. I tried to point out that 3 people had touched the machine, but the owner insisted they had not lost it, and the other technician had been working there too long to make that kind of mistake. A couple of days later, a friend who worked there told me the higher-ups thought I had stolen the chip to resell it. They also said the owner was actually a reasonable person, and that if I went in and explained how 3 people had handled the machine, they would likely split the cost of the missing processor 3 ways and consider it done. When I went back, I overheard the boss and the other employee who had modded the laptop talking about how they did not tolerate incompetence and that something had to be done. I knocked on the office door and asked to talk about the situation, even though the boss was Already talking about me, he said he did not have time right then. I waited until lunch and tried his office again. He was again in his office, discussing incompetence and theft with the same employee who nodded in agreement. The boss still did not have time to talk to me. When I left for lunch, I did not go back. I called my previous employer and asked for my old job back. They were happy to have me. I stayed home, confident in my decision. A couple of hours later, I got a call from my now former boss. They wanted to know why I was late. I told them I had my old job back and that I did not appreciate the avoidance and accusation without anyone talking to me. They said, "You realize what you just did, right? You walked off a job. You are fired." They said it themselves, "You walked, so you were fired." Whatever. I said I would come get my last paycheck next Monday. I got my check without incident and resumed my previous job as a taxi driver. The cost of the processor was not deducted from my check. Story 13. I am a white woman with very curly, large, blonde, natural hair. I straightened it for the interview. On my first day of work, I showed up with my natural hair. I understand some may consider that a bait and switch, but straightening my hair every day is very damaging. The owner and the lawyer I worked with grimaced and told me to get it under control. The next day, I put my hair in a bun and pinned it back. She looked at my hair with disgust and said it was fine. The following morning, I was fired. I can only assume the reason. Story 14. I worked at a bar and was fired for not checking the identification of a clearly 60-year-old woman who ordered a glass of wine during a holiday evening rush when I was working alone. Story 15. I worked in logistics. We were the overnight crew who handled back orders, misplaced shipping labels, and other shipping problems. The day shift dropped their unresolved items on us, and it was our job to sort them out. There were 3 other young women besides me. Our boss was a young man. Every weekend they would go out drinking and partying together. I politely declined. After a couple of months, my boss approached me and tried to strong-arm me into going. He tried to belittle and degrade me for wanting to just go home after work. I later found out that the 3 other women were not just partying with him. They were having sex with him, and he wanted me to do the same. I refused and left immediately. I did not yell at him. I planned to report him in the morning, but Human Resources was not open yet. I received a call at 8 a.m. Our shift usually ended between 3 a.m. and 4 a.m. They informed me that my services were no longer needed and told me not to return. Story 16. I was planning to go straight from work to camping on a Friday, so I had my truck all packed. My boss saw my sealed bottle of whiskey on the front seat and fired me for having alcohol at work. He seemed to have a grudge for some reason. Story 17. I was fired for being a no-show and not calling. The manager lied and said I never contacted her and that I was shaking like a leaf. I went to the owner and showed him my phone record. My outgoing call from the day before to the manager's number, a 90-second call, during which I reported that I had a fever and chills. 2 weeks later, they confirmed this was not the only lie. She had been embezzling money, and they then offered me her manager's job. I said I would accept only if they gave me her pay rate and benefits. They said they could not do that and I would not budge. I returned to the business, shook hands, and they apologized, but I hated that job anyway. Story 18. I was fired for not being available after hours as an hourly employee. I was never allowed to take my laptop home, and this happened during Ramadan. A client experienced an outage, and I was the only person in the area because my boss and their family were out camping. I filed a case with the Department of Labor. Story 19. I told the owner's son that I was pregnant when he offered me an alcoholic beverage during my shift. Story 20. I was fired from a grocery store for being too enthusiastic. They said it was not a good fit and suggested I become a camp counselor. The joke is on them. I became a camp counselor and loved it. Story 21. I corrected someone about my name. I said, "My name is Melissa, not Michelle." Story 22. I wasn't technically fired. I was an information technology contractor for a while. The client firm decided to make some contractors permanent. I was one of 2 on my team. Only one position was available, and the other contractor's contract would not be renewed. I was the better engineer, he was the better socializer, so he got the job. Edit. It is not like I was someone no one liked. My colleague was a smoker and I was not. Many long-term permanent staff were also smokers, so they had more in-person time with each other and the interaction was more casual. I am not nearly as bitter about it as it may sound. It was disappointing at the time and led to some rough times for a while, but now I am doing much better professionally than I probably would have if I had stayed. Story 23. I returned from vacation to find I no longer had a job because incompetent, scatterbrained managers assumed I had quit. They later realized their mistake and apologized, but said they had already replaced me. Story 24. I'm pretty sure I was fired for witnessing spousal abuse. I was doing groundskeeping for a wealthy business owner who was not really local. The company's products are sold nationwide in big box stores. One day, I was outside sweeping Buckeyes from the driveway when the husband screeched in driving a Mercedes Compressor sedan. He stormed inside, began yelling and slamming doors and cabinets. After a muffled argument, there was silence. A short while later, the wife came outside crying, holding a paycheck, and told me I was being let go. It was a cash job, so there was no recourse, but I am pretty sure that is what happened. Story 25. I am a high school history teacher with a Bachelor of Arts in History, a Master of Education in History, an Education Specialist degree in Advanced Pedagogy with an English for Speakers of Other Languages endorsement, and 10 years of teaching experience. My contract was not renewed because they decided to hire a football coach who had no teaching experience. Story 26. Back when I was a teenager, I got a job in the bakery department of a supermarket. During my break, I decided to get a treat and asked the manager to ring me up. He said, "It is on me, do not worry about it." I went upstairs to the McDonald's area to enjoy a strawberry cheesecake ice cream in a cup with a sugar cone on top. After my break, I returned downstairs where the head manager was waiting and told me I was fired for stealing ice cream. I tried to explain, but she would not listen. I had every intention of paying because the manager had said I did not have to pay. To this day, I believe there was a conspiracy to get me out and that I was set up by Heather and her cronies. Never trust a coworker or manager and always pay for ice cream. Story 27. I was fired for stealing time because I clocked in 3 minutes early. Apparently those extra minutes were a real threat to company profits. Story 28. I arrived at work 6 minutes late because of an accident on the freeway, but they said that was not a valid excuse. I signed the paperwork and walked out with a smile. When the manager asked why I was not upset, I replied, "Why should I be? You're losing your best asset." He laughed and said I was always too confident. The business went bankrupt and shut down a few months later. It was a coincidence. I was not a very good employee. Story 29. Telling the chief executive officer that my supervisor was committing criminal billing fraud. Story 30. Remember when Dwayne Wade won the finals versus the Mavericks way back in the day? Single-handedly? Yeah, I watched the whole game in the men's restroom and I got fired. Edit worth it. Story 31. In 1979, I was forced to resign my commission from the United States Air Force as a Lockheed C-141 Starlifter pilot because they discovered I was gay. Luckily, I had a great attorney and received an honorable discharge. I later worked for Delta Airlines and am now happily retired, enjoying life with my husband of 42 years. Story 32. I was too eager to prove myself. I am a classically trained woodworker. I completed 3 years of high school shop and a full year of college. I worked as a custom woodworker for 1 year and as a cabinet maker for 3 years. They wanted me to wait so they could train me to laminate boards together. The joints did not need to be flush because the boards were flattened on a computer numerical control machine afterward. Story 33. I worked at Old Navy for about 3 months in 2009. I was fired because I did not show up for work one day. I could not leave the house because a major ice storm had dropped a large tree across the dead-end dirt road where I lived in the woods. Our road was usually one of the last in town to be cleared. I explained this to my manager, but she accused me of lying and told me not to return. Story 34. I was written up for making an obscene gesture at my supervisor during a phone call. A coworker reported me. Story 35. I was fired for being too slow by the owner, who would pull his friends into his office to bullshit with him for half the day. Fuck you, dude. Story 36. I was hired to work on water pumps despite having no prior experience. I worked on pumps, fabricated frames for solar panels, and built solar systems. I laid pipe and installed sprinkler and pool systems. I learned to operate a forklift and sold plumbing supplies from the shop. I was fired after I could not determine why a solenoid was malfunctioning. I spent half a day attempting to fix it before replacing it. Story 37. I will never forget this. I used to work at a restaurant and came back to college during the summer to make some extra money. I was surprised to see some new faces, but that is the industry for you. A new interim manager was filling in while the old manager was off training and running food service exposition shows. She had apparently set aside some ice cream for herself in the freezer and pulled me into the office to ask why I had eaten it. I obviously had no idea what she was talking about and told her, so she fired me for insubordination or some such nonsense. It was probably my third day back. I think I was 18 at the time. I still cannot tell if she felt threatened by me or what. Either way, fuck that place and that lady. Story 38. I interviewed with the general manager of a restaurant, completed the walkthrough, accepted the offer, and received the company apron. On my first day, the assistant manager said the general manager had not informed him and took my apron. At the end of my first week, the general manager called and fired me for a no-call, no-show. Story 39. I told a customer I was going to kick 100% of their ass. Story 40. I was laid off because I would not accept a director's position without the title and pay while being expected to perform the work and responsibilities. Story 41. When I worked in a small tennis pro shop as a summer job during college, I greeted everyone and asked if I could help. If not, I let them shop until they asked about something. Apparently, I should not have asked, and they expected me to follow customers around and be a pushy salesperson. It was apparently so obvious that I was fired for not being aggressive enough with sales, even though I was never told I was expected to be the worst stereotype of a salesperson. I do not think it was a cover for anything else. I had 3 other jobs in the same private community before and after that, and everyone else thought I was great with the members. The pro shop was independently owned, so it had different bosses. Story 42. My sales went up. It was an inbound call center. I made a slight change to the order in which I read the upsell offer paragraphs. I did not change the words at all. My sales increased because I presented the explanation and the offer in a more logical order. The supervisor said, "Just read the script." I explained what I was doing and why, showed the statistics, and suggested that the marketing group modify the script so everyone could improve their sales. The supervisor said, "Just read the script." Technically, I quit before they could fire me, but I knew the paperwork was in progress. Story 43. I didn't take my break at the right time because I was with a customer. Later that day, I refused a service call near the end of my shift because it would have taken 40 minutes to get there, and there was a no overtime rule. By the time I arrived, I would have been on overtime. I was fired. I filed a grievance with the union, and they upheld the decision because I took my break at the wrong time. My boss was abusive and kept a list of people he planned to fire. I was the last one, and I made it hard for him to find cause. Story 44. I was not stealing the boxes. I was not there. It was my day off. Story 45. I worked at a grocery store. On my first day, I submitted a time-off request for a date 3 months in the future for my wife's college graduation. I followed up regularly with reminders to my supervisor. The week before, when the schedule was released, I was scheduled to work that day. I told my boss, but she said tough, and handed me a directory of employees to call to ask to cover my shift. I was not going to miss my wife's graduation, and I was fired. Story 46. My boss's best friend's son needed a job. He had been fired as a teacher's aide for calling his students with additional needs, dicks. Story 47. I have 3 examples. 1. I did not want to be friends with the new boss or hang out with her and my coworkers outside of work. Apparently, I was not enough of a team player, and this supposedly brought down morale for her. I was well liked by the rest of the staff and did hang out with them outside work. I just disliked the boss. 2. When I was a newer employee at a company, I got the flu and used sick time, staying out for a week. That Monday, they enacted a new attendance policy. Even though I had accrued and was using all my sick time, being out for the week violated the new policy. Human Resources acknowledged that I was not available to be briefed about the policy because I had started after the company-wide briefing and was out when it began. I was fired that Friday for violating the new attendance policy. 3. The most recent was in June. Benefits kick in at day 90 of employment. 44 other people and I were laid off on day 89. Later that week, I saw the job posting back up on Indeed with a $3 per hour decrease in starting pay. Story 48. Walmart. I swept the aisles all day and occasionally cleaned up spills. I was fired because I refused to clean up a fecal incident in the restroom. I received the usual speech about other duties as assigned and, jokingly, told them I was not certified to clean up biohazards. They told me that if I did not do it, I could clock out forever. I dropped my broom, spat on it, tossed my yellow vest behind me, and walked out of the store without clocking out. I received my final paycheck by mail about a week later and was paid for that entire day. Fuck Walmart. Story 49. I was not fired but laid off because the company was downsizing. I was one of 2 in my department. I did quality work and was always in the office. The other person was a slacker, lied about the work he did, and did not show up half the time. They let me go instead of him because he had been working there longer. Story 50. Although it was not me, a certified public accountant was fired for refusing to falsify records. He was dismissed suddenly but left with his integrity intact. His actual name is Rock. He was an amazing man. My manager, his adoptive daughter, quit the next day. He refused to participate in illegal white-collar crimes and blew the whistle on the company's actions. The Internal Revenue Service investigated and held the company accountable. The company was essentially stealing from clients in a very complex way. My department sold customer data to Johnson & Johnson in exchange for equipment such as computers, monitors, chairs, and, oddly enough, paper. Story 51. Not showing up to work for 18 months. It was a retail position, so working from home was not an option. It was not a sensible reason. What was more surprising was that it took them that long to act. I enjoyed the employee discount the whole time. Story 52. I refused to shake someone's hand or ask their name. I worked at Pep Boys and was a very good salesperson. I could tell when someone wanted to get their stuff and leave and did not want to deal with people. Our district manager was there when I refused to shake the customer's hand and walked me out. They stopped that behavior about 2 months later. Story 53. I reported a toxic manager to the vice president. He assured me everything would remain private and confidential, but the next day he exposed me like a mob informant. He is untrustworthy, and the manager is unprofessional. Story 54. I asked whether they had filled out the tax paperwork and were withholding taxes from my paycheck. I probably could have called someone in government, but I was 17 and only there for about a month. Story 55. I was fired because I reported a child protection concern. The agency wanted me gone because large sums of money were being made by unqualified and unvetted friends and family of management. A few weeks later, the recession hit and the agency was shut down. Story 56. I was back on the floor 5 minutes past my break. It had never been a problem before. Then a new assistant store manager from corporate arrived. I was throwing out 19 to 22 pallets of stock every day. Fuck you, Chris. You wheezy little shit. Story 57. I refused an order from the company president to lie to external auditors. I responded, I would like that order in writing, please. I was not immediately fired. However, after the president received his golden parachute, I was one of the first employees laid off by the new manager. Story 58. I was training to be a 911 operator in a very large metropolitan area. I, with my trainer listening in, received a 911 call around 3 in the morning from a woman about 45 to 50 years old who was crying because her boyfriend had hit her so hard that some of her teeth came out. I asked if she was safe now, whether her boyfriend had any weapons, and where she wanted to meet the officers. During the 45 to 60 seconds I spent asking those questions, She decided she did not want to go through with the process, which is common among domestic violence victims who fear officers will anger their abuser. I offered to arrange for her to meet officers down the block. My trainer became visibly angry. I continued with the woman who was considering my offer. I told her he should not be hitting her and that having officers come talk with her would at least provide some options. She said she would think about it. And before we hung up, I reminded her that we are always here to help everyone in the community, and she could call back anytime. She thanked me and hung up. My trainer was furious and said I should have hung up the moment she said she did not want help. I was let go for underperformance because the agency prioritized keeping call times under 3 minutes. That call was probably about 4 minutes. I was given the option to quit after they went back and readjusted my training assessment values to ensure I would not pass even if I aced every upcoming trial. I was the only trainee in my group of 6 to get 100% on both tests 1 and 2. In my resignation letter, I wrote that this job does not meet my definition of helping people and I wish the community good luck. Story 59. The restaurant supervisor asked if I liked his new decorations. I said no. They had changed from elegant to looking like a kid's birthday party. He fired me on the spot. I am not joking. That was the entire reason. Story 60. I told a client the truth about a minor issue, which exposed my boss's lie. Story 61. The new owner of the building abruptly ended the restaurant's lease after trying for months to get us kicked out because my boss was Jewish. There is a line in American Beauty. I did not lose my job. I did not show up one day and say, "Whoops, where did my job go?" But I have done exactly that and it sucks. Story 62. I don't know. I came into work one day and they told me I was fired, refused to tell me why, and that was it. I still shopped there for a couple of years afterward before the place shut down, and I never got any indication I had been replaced or disliked. It was genuinely odd. Story 63. The place had a point system. 7 points and they could fire you. You could reduce points by working overtime. I was only available on certain days. I specified this during hiring, but they continued to schedule me on days I was working elsewhere. Sometimes they removed a point. Sometimes they did not. I talked to everyone I could about it. Human resources, managers, and scheduling staff. They could not get their act together, so I decided not to either. I ended up with 3 times as many points and was waiting for them to fire me. I worked off the points that did not fall off over time and found myself below 7 points. A few weeks later, I got a call that I was being let go for having too many points. Story 64. I posted on the Giant Bomb forums, writing vaguely about the sexual harassment my manager was inflicting on a female coworker. I did not name the company, any people involved, or even the city. Apparently, they monitored all employees' personal accounts, even though I did not disclose my account name to them, and I did not access any personal accounts during work hours or at the office. The manager smiled at me as he told me they had found the post and that it was the reason for my termination. Story 65. They did not tell me why they were firing me. They said it was not a good fit. That was bullshit because I had been there for 2 years and had just received a performance bonus for the previous year. Apparently, they simply decided they did not like me and had no legitimate reason. Story 66. My manager had to fill out a form every day at noon. Only managers were allowed to retrieve, print, and complete the form. One day Megan was in the security office crying and could not do it. So she had me jump through hoops to get it done by noon by asking every manager to perform a separate part of the task. She cried for hours because of a boyfriend issue, if I recall correctly. The form was not a big deal, but it was standard procedure and could have caused minor trouble if an auditor came in at that time. A few weeks later, Megan was in the office crying for hours again. I called her repeatedly to get the form done, but she did not respond. She apparently assumed I would repeat the same process. I had no idea which file to ask a manager to open, where the executive printer was, or any of the other steps since I had only done it once. I could not get it done that day. A few days later, another manager pulled me into the office, questioned me about the form and why I had not completed it, said he was not aware that Megan had been crying for the entire shift, and fired me. Story 67. About 15 years ago, I worked at a casino. I refused to arrest a young adult who was accompanying his mother and allowed him to use the restroom. The boss, who was a former police officer, got into a heated disagreement. The young adult was arguing about being cut off and had a valid point that he was not driving. Because we had bussed him in from out of the area, they could not reasonably eject him from the property. He was told to sit outside and wait in the cold winter air with only a light jacket and no access to a restroom. I tried negotiating with the boss. I offered to escort him to an outside bathroom and tried to get the bus driver to let him use it. I tried to get a taxi to take him. The bridge crossing to the fast food joints was missing a guardrail due to construction and was not a safe option. I had to decide and allowed him to enter after holding his identification and screening him. I warned him to be quick. He got out about 2 minutes before they showed up to arrest him. Dispatch had been waiting to give the signal. I was fired for insubordination and told I should have escalated to the manager on duty, which I felt would still have been outside the proper chain of command. No regrets. I have to live with myself, and I am not ashamed or embarrassed about my decision. I fought and won my unemployment claim. Story 68. A married couple owned the pizza shop. The woman gave me the wrong address. When I returned, she tore up the order ticket and blamed the missed delivery on me, so she would not have a fight with her husband. He fired me on the spot. Story 69. I was 15 minutes late to work because I got a flat tire on the way. It was the shift after I had just received a final warning for attendance. The reason I was on a final warning was absurd. I had requested vacation months in advance, made hotel reservations, and booked plane tickets for a trip to Disney World. I went on vacation and everything was fine, but on Monday my workplace repeatedly called to ask where I was. They had recorded me as a no-call, no-show. The vacation was in October. I had requested it in May. I had asked my supervisor whether my vacation was approved, and she said it was. Apparently there was a clerical error and human resources failed to enter it into the system. They wanted me to return immediately, but I told them it was not possible. I eventually returned, was dragged into human resources with my supervisor, and was placed on a final warning for attendance. I had 0 write-ups in my 6 years there. Rather than make a big deal, I signed the paper because I thought I had perfect attendance and the warning would expire in 6 months. The next day I had a flat tire on my way to work, and I was fired. Story 70. I worked in a department store. In the evenings we were supposed to help customers, clean up, and prepare our section for the next morning. They hired an employee who either could not or would not do the job and was rarely seen outside the break room. The rest of us were told to check her area of responsibility and, if it was not done, to do the work ourselves. One night, I completely failed to check one aisle in her area. A week later, I was called into the office to discuss this failure and asked to sign a form stating I had been counseled. The form would remain in my employment file and would be removed if I had no further incidents within a 6-month period. I suggested they counsel the employee whose responsibility it was to do the job, and I refused to sign. They fired me. Within a week, 7 other employees quit without notice. Story 71. Some father believed I was whispering in his 3-year-old's ear to make her use bad language, or that I allowed the other children I babysat to whisper to his daughter to encourage it. He insisted he never used bad language around her, and that the only time he did was when he played video games with a headset while she was in bed sleeping. She was the lightest sleeper I had ever cared for. Meanwhile, the mother had custody of her since before summer, so I had not had her in months. I only watched her when the father had custody. The week she returned to me, she was already using profanity regularly. I had been caring for her for years, so it broke my heart. I had never had a parent remove their child from my care before. It was also frustrating because the father was upset that she was not potty trained at my house. Supposedly, she was fully trained at his. He kept her on the potty around the clock at his house, but at my house she refused because she worried other children would play with or take her toys. We would sit on the potty for half an hour before nap time, but she would hold it until I laid her down. He thought I was slacking, but as soon as I left the room to clean up after lunch, she often had a bowel movement. If I noticed and took her to the toilet, she would scream loudly and wake the other children. Story 72. I fell asleep during my coffee break with an alarm set to wake me when the break ended, but I did it inside a huge box of packing peanuts. Story 73. At Subway, the franchise owner accused me of overweighing the meat, even though I carefully rechecked that the weight matched the chart posted above the prep table. I never found out the truth. Story 74. I was yawning too much. It was at a place that assembled headlights for bicycles. I was not peppy enough for that particular assembly line. Story 75. I came in on a day when we were closed because of snow. I had a key and went to get an important medication for a client's dog. Fuck me for caring. Story 76. An Amazon fulfillment center hired me for 2 different jobs. I attended my first day for the position I wanted, but 2 days later, when I arrived for my shift, I was told I had been fired for not attending that first day. Story 77. I had a vacation scheduled with plane tickets when I accepted a job that started a few weeks before my trip. The recruiter agreed to let me take those days off. When I returned to the office, I found my boss had denied those days in the system, so I was marked with 10 absences. I was fired but ended up signing a resignation letter. It was my first job. Story 78. I was not fired but was written up. I was told I was too happy at work and that it made the others look bad. I'm sorry. I'll try to be a more miserable person. Story 79. One of my first bosses had the absolute worst breath in the world. I could smell it from the entrance of the warehouse. It was a moving company where I worked in high school. One day it hit particularly hard and I told him that I was pretty sure he had tooth decay because his teeth looked white but his breath smelled like feces. I was being honest, and after that I stopped receiving any deliveries. I am now a master electrician with my own company, but I will never forget that. Story 80. I made 12 sample wedding cake cups for an order. To visualize, they are about 4-ounce cups filled with a dollop of buttercream, 1 layer of filling cake, then another dollop. I forgot to add the layer of raspberry filling, so I scraped the top icing off and began removing the cake to add the layer when my boss came over and started yelling that I was wasting product and was incompetent and to get the fuck out. So I left. Over 2 ounces of buttercream were wasted. That woman was a bitch. Her shop closed about 6 months after I left, so I don't even worry about it. Story 81. I worked in a short-term call center for a while. I was fired because not enough people would answer their phones. Story 82. This happened in the 1990s. While hiking, I fell and sprained my ankle. My ankle turned black and blue, swelled to almost 3 times its size, and I could not put any weight on it without falling. I went to the doctor, received crutches, had my ankle wrapped, and was instructed to avoid putting weight on it as much as possible. I then told my boss that I could not work until it healed and showed them my ankle. They told me that if I was not willing to work in that condition, I would not have a job. I was fired for twisting my ankle. You have to love the lack of worker protections in the United States. Story 83. Music piped through the phone system as the song Echoes by Pink Floyd played throughout a giant manufacturing plant that made earth-moving equipment. The plant was empty of employees because it was Christmas Eve. I was a security guard there in the early 1990s. I just wanted to listen to some music while doing my rounds that night. I connected my boombox in the guard shack outside to the phone intercom system throughout, using a 3.5mm phone jack on alligator clips connected directly to the terminals on a telephone handset microphone. Apparently a big shot walked in that night, and I was fired the next day. Sounded amazing and was worth it. Story 84. Years ago, I was fired for working too much overtime. When I finished my routes with a home medical care company, I was supposed to call in. They then assigned me everyone else's stops. If I refused an additional stop, I was fired immediately. I believe it was because I told them it is illegal to have us unload our vans at the end of the day off the clock. I have not worked there in 20 years. American Home Patient is still around. Story 85. I worked in human resources. I was fired for not responding to employee inquiries that came through very late at night because we supported a global workforce. My boss was in my time zone, so she knew it was very late for me but wanted me to go to bed later to serve those employees. I was fired a week after I said fuck it and stopped responding past 8 p.m., which I consider more than reasonable. Story 86. I was working in a restaurant. We had just gotten a fancy 8-burner double oven range, all stainless with cast iron burner plates. My kitchen manager said to keep it looking nice, clean it every night, and run the tops through the dishwasher. I said, "Those are cast iron. They'll rust if we do that." He replied, "You're paid to act, not think." A week later, the owner asked me why I had told the kitchen manager that running the tops through the dishwasher would be a good idea. Thankfully, the rest of the kitchen backed me up about what happened. I was fired on the spot for not exerting myself enough to prevent damage to the business. Story 87. For nothing. He came in, looked at me and said, "You are not working here anymore." That was it. Story 88. My vice president sent out a press release before the legal department had signed off. She claimed I did it and fired me, although I did not have access. I was not given an opportunity to defend myself and was immediately shown the door. Story 89. My boss repeatedly told me I smelled odd and eventually fired me. No one else agreed. I asked friends, family, acquaintances, and even strangers, which sometimes drew strange looks. She could not describe the odor, only called it weird. The kicker was that it was a law office and she was a labor attorney specializing in discriminatory firings. I might have pursued the matter, but I was badly unsuited to that job and did not care enough to follow up. Story 90. A friend of mine died. I arranged for coverage and left a note signed by both of us and one manager. I came in the day after the funeral service and was informed by the owner that I had acted illegally and was released. The place was a mess anyway. Story 91. I did not tell my children to leave me alone to work when I was stuck at home after the coronavirus disease 2019 outbreak. I had 3 children, all elementary school aged, and we were taking things very seriously a few months in. My manager, who was divorced and whose adult children did not live with him, worked from home with his dogs for company and told me I needed to focus on my work and ignore my children. He said if they came to the door knocking and needing me, I should tell them to go away because I had to do my work. At that point, I welcomed a performance improvement plan and quietly stopped going above and beyond until they let me and a number of my coworkers go. I still do not regret my actions. Story 92. I worked at a coffee shop around Christmas. I asked the owner if I could pick up a couple of half-gallon containers of eggnog on my milk run and make some eggnog lattes because customers were requesting them. I bought some, mixed it half and half with whole milk, and steamed it. We sold out of both drinks in about half an hour after I put up a special of the day sign at the register. The owner told me to buy another 6 half-gallon containers, which I did. I went through 3 more before she noticed I had bought regular eggnog. She became upset because the latte I had made for her husband ended up in her hands. She drank it and loved it, then realized it was made with regular eggnog. She weighed about 90 pounds and had opened the cafe as a hobby because her husband was worth tens of millions of dollars. The cafe went out of business 6 months later. In an interview, the owner told the press that rent was too high. Pete's took over the location about a year later, and it has been a Pete's ever since, probably for more than 20 years. Story 93. I was accused of admitting to disobeying a direct order from a superior. I live in a one-party consent state and have recordings of the after-action interview in which I never admitted to anything. I did not do it, but the official record cites an admission. Story 94. I was let go from a bank after 5 years of employment for being gay. The official reason was budget cuts, since I was the last person hired into the department. However, another supervisor told me the real reason. This is an at-will state, so I could not fight it, and my unemployment claim was denied. Story 95. Laughing with a coworker. Literally. We don't feel you're a team player. Story 96. I was a barista managing the cafe's social media without pay at a new mom and pop place. I posted a meme that said "Grab Monday by the beans." I was fired by the end of my shift. Story 97. I was fired from a restaurant because the owner's wife attempted to have sex with me. Story 98. I was a lesbian in the 1990s when it was still a valid reason in the country I lived in. Story 99. Called out the company for padding client invoices with line items that sounded important, but were nonsensical and made up, such as coordinating a new domain name with global internet providers. Story 100. I was considered too slow as a quality control technician working for a company that fudged all their tests and quality assurance checks. I worked diligently and honestly, performing all tests properly, while they were accustomed to instant dishonest shortcuts that were faster but likely illegal. Story 101. I used to only own a motorcycle. I did not have a car. One day in 2012, I called in sick to work because I was going to get food and medicine, and I was promptly fired. Someone on a lunch break told the boss I was out joyriding on my bike, which was my only mode of transportation. I'm not the type to habitually call off. I work pretty hard. In fact, I have not taken a sick day since 2015. Fuck those people. Story 102. I was fired for alleged theft from my employer. Lottery tickets, cash from the drawer, and food. Except I hadn't stolen anything. The owner was a boomer with a deep hatred for anything with a vagina, including his wife and 4 daughters, and I was only a teenage girl. My boyfriend at the time worked there too. He quit right after I was fired, saying he was doing it in solidarity. It turned out he was the one stealing. When I asked him why, he called me an idiot for not knowing where the rent money was coming from. After that, I was a single teenage girl. Story 103. I told my supervisor about a job offer. They had been good to me, and I wanted to do right by them and help with the transition. They begged me to stay. 6 weeks later, they fired me and said I was too loyal and should have left years ago. Story 104. I was working at a plastic bag factory. When I started, the man training me was excellent. He taught me everything to the letter and made sure I learned all the tasks. A few months later, I was told he was leaving and that I was taking his position. I thanked him for everything he had taught me. Years later, he returned but took the office position. I went to the manager and told her it was fine if he wanted his old position back. She said it was fine because he had not asked for it, so everything was okay. I told him the same and he said the same. He added that if I ever changed my mind to let him know and that he had no problem giving me my old position. A couple of months later, I was sorting pallets outside near the loading dock. There was a small blackberry tree I had been taking care of because I liked it, and it was finally producing fruit. He joined me and asked if he could drive the forklift for old time's sake. I said okay and let him. Later, he asked me to help take down the tree. I asked why. It was not in the way and it was not bothering anyone. He said the manager had told him to, so I reluctantly agreed. At the end of my shift, I was called to the office and written up for insubordination for not doing what he had asked me to do. I was surprised. I had only asked why, but I accepted the write-up. Before I left, I went to him, apologized, and said I did not realize he felt that way and that I would do what I was told. He replied that he was just following orders. The next day, I was called to the office and the manager told me she was firing me for threatening him and cursing at him. I was very surprised and asked that he be brought in, but they refused and told me to leave immediately or they would call the police. A day after I was fired, a friend who still worked there told me they had immediately put him in my position. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.